Biker gang attacks young black kid, didn't know he was recording. It happened so fast that Devin's heart nearly exploded in his chest, adrenaline flooding him before he could even make sense of the scene unfolding around him. He'd been skateboarding along that deserted stretch of highway, his trusty old deck rattling over the rough asphalt, headphones blaring some mellow indie track, when the thunder of engines cut through his music, the ground trembling beneath him. He looked up in time to see a dozen headlights bearing down from a curve up ahead. A line of motorcycles, roaring in unison, tore through the still air. Everything about their approach spelled danger, but Devin was trapped in place by the shock of it, the sudden sense that something very bad was about to happen, and his limbs moved too slowly to get out of the way. Still, Devin didn't realize the full gravity of the threat. Maybe they'd just roar by and disappear around the bend, leaving him stunned but unharmed. He was, after all, just a 15-year-old kid out for a skateboard ride. But the first cyclist swerved directly toward him, the bike's engine screaming as it accelerated. Devin dropped the board and tried to leap to the grassy embankment at the road's edge, but the biker cut him off. The rush of air and the heat of the motorcycle's engine slapped him in the face as the machine screeched to a stop mere inches from Devin's kneecaps. It was only then that he saw the patch on the rider's jacket. A fiery skull with wings, set on a black background, an emblem that marked a local biker gang known for their ruthlessness, and rumored to be involved in more than just casual intimidation. Devin stood there, breath caught in his throat, eyes wide, too afraid to speak. The next motorcycles skidded to a stop behind the first, one after another in a series of metallic shrieks, until he was surrounded on all sides, helpless. The lead biker, a towering man with a wild tangle of hair and a grizzled beard, lifted his goggles and fixed Devin with a glare that burned through him. The man had a face like chipped granite, a network of scars, a crooked nose. Everything in his expression screamed hostility. The others behind him revved their engines in a menacing symphony of mechanical growls. Out for a little stroll, the lead biker spat. His voice was raspy, laced with a bitter amusement that only fueled Devin's fear. Devin found himself swallowing a lump in his throat, trying to muster the courage to speak. But when he opened his mouth, only a trembling breath escaped. Another biker, a woman with an equally hardened expression, let out a laugh so cold it made Devin's skin prickle. He realized then that he was alone. This was a deserted road. Nobody was around to witness anything. The closest gas station, or convenience store, was at least 2 miles back in the direction he'd come from. Devin had chosen this route on purpose for its isolation. He wanted a bit of peace and quiet away from the usual city bustle. Now, he was cursing that decision with every fiber of his being. The lead biker's pale eyes flicked up and down Devin's lean figure. Devin hadn't hit his growth spurt yet. He was scrawny, lanky, dressed in faded jeans, a simple sweatshirt, and high-top sneakers. His dark skin glowed under the midday sun, sweat forming at his temples. He had the fleeting thought, are they going to hurt me because I'm just some kid in the wrong place at the wrong time, or is there more to this? Got anything worth taking? The man asked with a sneer, stepping off his bike. Boots crunched in the gravel. He loomed over Devin in a way that hammered in the fact that Devin was smaller, weaker, and in real trouble. Devin's heart hammered as he realized the possibility of a robbery. He patted his pockets reflexively. He didn't have much, just his phone, a couple of crumpled dollar bills, a half-eaten candy bar, and a water bottle stuffed in the small backpack slung over his shoulder. But it wasn't the potential theft that terrified him. It was the savage excitement in the biker's eyes, as though the man was hungry for violence, for a chance to demonstrate his power. A second biker chimed in, a stocky man with tattoos creeping up his neck, meeting the line of his shaved head. His voice was impatient and laced with aggression. "Teach this little punk a lesson," he muttered, fists clenching. Devin tried to speak again, to explain he had nothing of value, but the words snagged in his throat. He managed to stammer, I don't have, I'm just going home, please." Each word made him feel small, and he hated the helplessness that threatened to break him. His phone was tucked in his pocket. He'd recorded videos before, little skateboarding stunts, comedic bits for his social media feed. He had this habit of pulling out his phone to film random stuff. In a flash of desperate thinking, Devin realized if he could start recording, maybe he could create evidence, but he had to do it discreetly. He wasn't sure if brandishing a phone in a moment like this would set them off more. Fear pounded in his head like a drumbeat, but so did a glimmer of determination. If anything happened, he wanted a record. He wanted someone to see. He slid his hand into his pocket, fumbling for the phone's camera app as unobtrusively as he could. The phone buzzed, the screen lighting up. Devin prayed none of them noticed. The woman with the cold laugh hopped off her own bike and started to circle him, sizing him up with eyes that glittered with sadistic curiosity. She took out a small chain from her belt, snapping it taut between her hands. Devin's chest constricted. This was real. This was life and death. His only hope was that in a second, someone might drive by, or that he'd find an opening to run. "Check his bag," the lead biker growled, flicking his chin at one of the men who was stepping forward. Devin clutched his skateboard in one hand and his backpack strap with the other, but he stood no chance. The man ripped the backpack away easily. Devin's eyes flicked around frantically. The ring of motorcycles was tight, and the only gap was now filled by one of the other gang members who had just gotten off his bike. Devin's phone was now recording audio, and possibly video if he angled it right, but his mind whirled, uncertain. If they discovered he was recording them, they might escalate even further. He heard the rummaging in his backpack, the zipper's harsh rasp. A moment later, the second biker laughed derisively. "Just some water, candy, a pencil or two, not exactly a jackpot." "Kid worthless," another one chimed in. "I say we teach him a lesson about crossing our territory anyway." Devin's breathing grew ragged. Territory. He wasn't crossing anything, he was just trying to get home, but these weren't rational people. They wanted to feed on fear, to instill it. He could almost smell their adrenaline, the charged cruelty that hung in the air. He squeezed his phone. It was still in his pocket, angled upward. He couldn't look down to confirm it was capturing anything, but hopefully the audio alone would be enough evidence. He tried to speak calmly, leveling his voice as much as he could, though it wavered. "Listen, I'll just walk away, and I won't say anything to anyone. I swear, I don't want trouble." The leader's lips curled into a sneer. Trouble's already here. With an almost casual motion, he backhanded Devin across the cheek, forcing him to stumble. Devin's feet tangled, and he hit the asphalt hard, a flare of pain shooting up his wrists. His board clattered away. For a moment his vision spun. The sting was immediate and hot, blossoming across his face. He tasted blood on his lip. Laughter rippled through the group, vicious and mocking. Devin's face burned, not just from the slap, but from the humiliating fact that he couldn't do a thing about it. Anger started bubbling beneath his terror. He was a quiet kid, never the type to pick a fight. But right now, something inside him rebelled against just lying there, letting them degrade him. The chain-wielding woman sneered and cracked the chain like a whip. Devin flinched. She advanced, jabbing a boot toward his. He rolled to avoid the kick, scraping his palms on the asphalt. The air was heavy with the rumble of a dozen motorcycles, some still idling, the odor of exhaust mixing with dust. Every nerve in Devin's body screamed for an escape route, but these bikers had him boxed in like a caged animal. "You know," the lead biker said, "kids need discipline. These days you run your mouth, do your little videos, think you own the streets, but you don't own anything." He kicked Devin's skateboard aside. It landed with a hollow clunk against a ditch. The deck was chipped, and the wheels spun idly. Devin's mind raced. Could he outrun them if he sprinted? Could he slip past them if they were off their bikes? Maybe, if he feigned compliance, there might be a moment to slip free. He glanced at the dusty embankment. The grass rose on a hill dotted with sparse trees, no real cover if they decided to chase him. And they had motorcycles. He'd never get far on foot. He felt the phone in his pocket vibrating lightly, perhaps from the friction of his trembling leg. He had to keep them talking, keep them from discovering the recording. He also had to survive. Summoning a deep breath, he tried a different tack. "Look, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding," he said, trying to slow his heartbeat. "I'm just a high school student. Let me go, and you'll never hear from me again." Another one of the bikers laughed. This one was short and wiry with a mouth full of crooked, stained teeth. "We believe that, don't we?" The man gave an exaggerated wink toward the lead biker, as if they had an inside joke. And it was that joking familiarity that rattled Devin the most. They were so used to this dynamic of power and intimidation that hurting a random kid was entertainment. The woman with the chain advanced again. This time she slammed the chain across Devin's shoulder, the metal biting through his sweatshirt. He cried out in pain, rolling to the side, arms up to shield himself. The sting was brutal, but the potential for worse lingered in the air. Tears pricked his eyes. Anger, fear, humiliation, an ugly cocktail churned inside him. The lead biker, apparently called by the shorter man, let out a low chuckle. "He doesn't look so tough. Give him something to remember us by." At that, the circle closed. Devin's pulse hammered in his ears. He had to do something. He tried to scramble to his feet, but the chain came down again, hitting his calf this time. A yelp tore from his throat. The ring of bikers pressed closer, a threatening wall of leather and metal, each one wearing that patch with the flaming skull. The engines revved in irregular bursts, like the laughter of mechanical beasts. Devon thought of his mother, her face, her gentle voice telling him to always be careful. He thought of his little sister, who looked up to him, and how he'd promised to teach her how to skateboard once she got old enough to keep her balance. The idea of never seeing them again, or ending up crippled, filled him with a desperation that gnawed at his guts. Maybe it was this last flicker of defiance that spurred him on. He ducked under another swing from the chain and dove toward the gap between two bikes. He managed a yard or two of distance before the lead biker's voice roared, "Get him." Someone grabbed Devon's hoodie from behind. He twisted, the fabric ripping, and the force pitched him off balance. He slammed onto his back, the wind whooshing out of him. Stars danced in his vision. Another biker was on him, a heavy boot pressing into Devon's chest, pinning him down. Devon strained and gasped. The biker ground his heel in, making Devon grunt in agony. A scrawny, rat-faced man with watery eyes stood over him, smiling. "You should just hand it over your wallet," he hissed. His breath was foul, and his grin revealed teeth yellowed from too many cigarettes and too little dental care. He leaned down, pressing more weight into Devon's. "Now, we gotta make an example out of you." The surrounding gang members cheered him on in a savage chorus. Devon's phone shifted in his pocket. He felt the corner of the device biting into his hip, and he prayed it was still capturing all of this. If there was any justice in the world, the footage might someday be used against these monsters. But that was only if Devon lived to see tomorrow. He coughed, trying to suck in enough air to speak. "Please," he croaked, forcing the word past lips that felt numb. "You're gonna kill me." The leader prowled closer, giving the scrawny man a tap on the shoulder, wordlessly commanding him to ease off. The man obliged, lifting his boot just enough for Devon to gasp in a lungful of air. The next moment, crouched down, his features contorting into a grim smile. "Not if you behave," he said quietly. "We might let you crawl away, but you gotta learn your place." Devon caught the steely glint in the leader's eyes. This was a power trip, a demonstration of territory and strength, and possibly a glimpse of some deeper cruelty that demanded an outlet. His voice lowered, barely audible above the wind and the distant rumble of the parked bikes. "We run these roads, boy. You don't belong here, you understand." Devon nodded stiffly. "I understand," he whispered. It felt humiliating to comply, but he saw no other way. It was survival. He needed to live, and if that meant swallowing his pride, he would do it. "I won't come back this way." Gave a slow nod, then rose to his feet. Some of the bikers looked disappointed, as though they craved a more brutal beating. The man with the chain spat onto the ground near Devon's sneakers. Ratface scowled, wiping his mouth as though he wanted to keep going. Paced back to his motorcycle, probably deciding if that was enough intimidation for the day. For a moment, it seemed that might be the end of it. Devon remained on the ground, chest heaving, one hand pressed to the throbbing pain in his calf. His backpack and board were scattered to the side. Maybe this nightmare was over. But then a voice from the back of the group piped up. "Yo, Jericho," the kid's got his phone out. Devon's stomach sank like a stone in water. His eyes snapped wide, and he saw a slender man with dreadlocks pointing toward Devon's pocket. The corner of the phone was clearly visible, slightly protruding. Fear electrified Devon, overshadowing the physical pain. If they found out he was recording. In 2 strides was looming over him again. He reached down with surprising quickness and snatched the phone from Devon's pocket. Devon wanted to protest, to scramble for it, but he knew better. He watched, heart hammering so loud he feared they could all hear it, as peered at the lit screen. Then his face darkened. "Recording, huh?" said, flicking his gaze at the phone's display. With a few clicks, he saw that it had been capturing audio and video for several minutes. Devon's pulse pounded in his temples. The gang was silent, a hush that bristled with tension. This was more serious than a random mugging. If the phone had been sending that feed anywhere, or if it was uploaded to the cloud, they were looking at potential evidence, real consequences. The chain-wielding woman let out an infuriated hiss. "This little rat was filming us." She lashed the chain menacingly again, metal rattling against metal. "He's gotta learn," she spat. "We can't let him walk away now." Ratface closed in on Devon, veins bulging in his neck. "How much did you record, kid?" He demanded. Devon couldn't speak. Terror had him locked up. He could only swallow hard, waiting for the worst. Leveled the phone at Devon with cold calculation. "You trying to pull a fast one on us?" Devon managed a croaking whisper. "No, I was scared. He had no excuse. He knew it was a risk, but some part of him had believed that capturing the evidence might save him, might do something to prevent this from happening again to someone else. Scrolled through the phone, checking to see if anything was sent or uploaded. Devon prayed that in his panic, he hadn't accidentally gone live on social media, because if they suspected that the footage was already out in the world, they'd have nothing left to lose. One of the women standing near leaned over his shoulder. "Delete it," she said through gritted teeth. "You want to get rid of the evidence, don't you? Unless you want us all locked up." The scrawny, rat-faced man shifted from foot to foot anxiously. "We'll delete it, but how do we know he won't talk, or that he hasn't already posted something somewhere?" The tension in the group thickened. Devon saw a line of sweat glisten on his forehead. The leader was torn, balancing caution with pride. If the recording still existed, if Devon had posted even a second of it somewhere, they were in deep trouble. But if they let him go free, what was to stop him from going to the cops? In that pregnant silence, Devon found a last flicker of courage. "I haven't posted anything. It's local storage only," he said quietly. "Just my phone. Go ahead and delete it. I promise I won't say a word." He saw his jaw flex. The man stared down at the phone, searching for the camera roll. All around them, the rest of the gang closed in like a pack of wolves. Devon's only hope was that the phone had automatically backed up to the cloud. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance the video was safe somewhere. But he wasn't sure. He'd never tested it on the open road with a shaky signal. The phone was in his hands. The leader pulled up the video, watched the first few seconds where Devon had discreetly started recording. Devon heard the faint echo of the gang's voices, the woman with the chain cursed under her breath. His eyes turned feral. He tapped a few times on the screen. A beep signaled that the video had been deleted from the phone's local storage. Then, with a single swift motion, turned and smashed the phone on the ground, stomping on it. The plastic and glass shards scattered. The phone was destroyed beyond repair. A gasp escaped Devon's lips, his last link to outside help gone. His eyes flared with intimidation as he glared down at Devon. "There's your evidence," he said, voice ice cold. "Now, as far as I'm concerned, you're never gonna breathe a word of this to anyone, because if you do, we will find you, and next time we won't be so friendly." Friendly. The word almost choked Devon as he attempted a bitter laugh that ended in a sob. Blood trickled from his split lip, his body screaming in pain. He held in the retort that threatened to burst forth. Instead, he managed a slight nod, eyes lowered. He could hardly muster the energy to stand. The chain-wielding woman stepped in, hooking her chain around Devon's arm. He winced, expecting another beating. His voice cut in. "Raven, that's enough." The tension in the woman's posture suggested she wanted to keep going, but she obeyed, letting the chain go limp. Reluctantly, she backed off, eyes gleaming with hostility. For a moment, the group seemed to stand in suspended time. Devon on the ground, battered and trembling. The gang members, each a menacing statue. The idling motorcycles roared softly, the only sound in that deserted stretch of road. Then jerked his chin at the others. "Mount up," he commanded. The bikers began to shuffle away, climbing onto their roaring machines. Ratface spat in Devon's direction one last time, wearing a twisted scowl. The chain-wielding woman, Raven, hesitated, then offered Devon a sneer of contempt before swinging her leg over her motorcycle seat. Each rider turned their engine up, headlights blinking in the midday brightness. Devon expected them to tear off, but instead signaled for them to wait. The leader crouched once more, leveling his gaze with Devon. "If you run your mouth about this, if you so much as hint to anyone that you saw us out here, I will personally hunt you down. You get me?" His voice was as flat and emotionless as a guillotine blade. Devon forced himself to nod, even though terror gripped him. He was certain could see the fear in his eyes, and he hated that, but there was no fight left. He just wanted them gone. The roar of the engines swelled, and one by one, the bikes peeled off, forming a line that snaked down the highway until they vanished behind the bend. Their thunderous departure left a haze of dust and the echo of mechanical snarls. Devon lay there for several minutes, dust coating his skin, everything hurting. He was shaking so badly he could hardly get up. The adrenaline that had fueled him was draining away, leaving behind a throbbing ache. He felt tears spill from his eyes. The shock, the pain, the humiliation of being helpless, but also an ember of fury. They destroyed his phone, but had they really destroyed the footage? He dragged himself to his feet slowly, testing his weight on each leg. The chain had left bruises, possibly welts, on his shoulder and calf. Every breath hurt from where Ratface had stomped on his chest. Carefully, he limped to the side of the road and fished out his backpack from the ditch. The skateboard was a few yards away. He retrieved that too, though the deck was chipped. Then he turned his attention to the shattered remnants of his phone. Maybe the memory card or something else was salvageable. But the phone was in pieces, the screen was obliterated, the internal components crushed. He dropped to his knees, rummaging through the fragments, trying not to slice his fingers on the sharp edges of glass. A quick glance told him that the phone was likely beyond repair. Still, a faint spark of hope lingered. Maybe the video had auto-backed up to his cloud storage. He wouldn't know until he got to a computer or a new phone. He was no tech, but he knew sometimes data was saved. Gingerly, Devin rose again, staring at the long, empty road where the biker gang had disappeared. His heart hammered with the memory of their sneers, their hostility. He felt alone, violated, and furious. Taking a moment to gather his shattered composure, he began the painful trek back toward civilization, skateboard in hand, ignoring the pounding of his bruised limbs. There was no question now that he needed to get off this road as soon as possible. Every step was torment. The chain's impact had left his calf stiff and swollen. His back ached from being slammed onto the ground. He was still reeling from the raw shock of it all, the knowledge that these people existed in the same world as him, and that they had zero regard for human life. He had never felt so powerless. As he limped forward, his mind began to race with questions. If there was a video backup, would that be enough for the police to identify these bikers? What if they recognized him again on the streets and tried to finish what they started? Could he go to the police? Or would that guarantee a target on his back? And how could he possibly keep this from his mom, who would notice his injuries the moment he walked in the door? But there was another side of him, the side that had pressed record. He wanted justice. He wanted to see them pay for what they'd done. Anger mixed with his fear, fueling each ragged step. They might think they'd intimidated him into silence, but if he had the evidence, he owed it to himself, and to anyone else they might have brutalized, to bring it to light, even if it put him in danger. Devin trudged on, sweat pouring down his face. The sun blazed overhead, punishing him, sapping what little energy he had left. After what felt like an eternity, he saw the roofline of a convenience store at the bottom of a slope just off the highway. Relief nearly buckled his knees. He needed water and maybe a phone to call home. But as he approached, another wave of anxiety hit him. What if the bikers were still around? What if they had someone posted at gas stations to keep an eye out? Pushing the paranoia down, Devin continued, determined that he needed help, no matter the risk. He reached the store's parking lot, noticing a single pickup truck idling by the pumps. An older woman in the driver's seat looked up as Devin hobbled past, eyes flicking over his injuries. She said nothing, but he saw concern etched on her face. Devin ignored it, feeling self-conscious about his torn hoodie and the dried blood around his mouth. He made his way inside, the bell above the door jarring in the silence. Neon lights flickered overhead, and the crisp smell of disinfectant hung in the air. A bored-looking cashier perked up the instant she saw him. Her eyes widened at the state of him, bruised, battered, obviously distressed. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, coming around the counter. "What happened?" Devin opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. He realized he was trembling so hard that the skateboard rattled against the tiled floor. Exhausted tears pricked at the corners of his eyes again. The clerk gently guided him to a plastic chair near the entrance. "Let me get you some water," she said, her tone motherly and concerned. Devin sank into the chair, wincing at the pain in his back and legs. The clerk returned with a bottle of water and a first aid kit. "I'm calling an ambulance," she announced, fumbling for her phone. "No," Devin blurted, panic flashing across his face. "No ambulance. I don't have insurance, and I just need to call my mom." It wasn't that his mother didn't have insurance. It was more that he feared a hospital would bring the police, and the police would bring more questions, and that might bring the gang's wrath down on him. He wasn't ready for that, not yet. Still, he knew he needed some kind of help. His injuries might not be life-threatening, but the ache and bruising were severe. The clerk hesitated, biting her lip. "Okay," she finally said, pressing her phone into his hands. "But if you start feeling dizzy, or if you think you need an ambulance, we're calling one. No questions asked." Devin nodded, grateful. With trembling fingers, he dialed his mother's number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hello." Her voice was warm, comforting, but immediately tinged with worry at the shaky breath on the other end. "Devin, is that you?" Tears rolled down his cheeks. He tried to fight them, but hearing her voice unleashed the flood of pent-up terror. "Mom, can you?" His throat closed off and he couldn't finish. "Devin, what's wrong? Where are you?" Her voice rose in alarm. He sucked in a breath. "Mom, I need you to pick me up at the convenience store off exit 14, please." He trailed off, not sure how much to say. I'm on my way, she said immediately. Stay put, stay safe. Devin hung up, pressing his face into his free hand. He felt the cashier's gentle touch on his shoulder. She offered him a damp cloth to wipe the blood from his face. He thanked her in a whisper. Minutes ticked by slowly. Devin sipped water, his mind a whirl of conflicting thoughts. He replayed the incident over and over, cringing at the memory of that chain biting into his flesh, of the phone being smashed, the threats, but also remembering that there was a chance, however slim, that the video had auto-uploaded somewhere. His mother arrived soon after, eyes wide with horror at the sight of him. She rushed in, ignoring the curious stares of the few customers milling about. "Oh my baby, what happened?" she exclaimed, hugging him gently, trying not to exacerbate his injuries. He flinched a little but clung to her, letting himself sob quietly into her shoulder. She smelled of home, faint traces of laundry detergent and cooking spices. "We're going to the hospital," she declared, her tone brooking no argument. He shook his head into her shoulder. "Mom, they threatened me if I told anyone." She pulled back, her eyes blazing. "I don't care what they threatened. You're hurt. We need to get you medical attention." Devin swallowed, the guilt and relief tangling in his stomach. He could see no logical path forward that didn't involve the police in some capacity, but the fear of retaliation loomed large. "Mom, you don't understand. They said they'd kill me if I talked." She cupped his cheek. "We'll deal with that, I promise. Right now, you need help." Tears shimmered in her eyes, her face a portrait of worry and fierce protectiveness. She thanked the cashier for helping Devin and gently guided him out to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like it took hours, though in reality it was only 30 minutes. Devin cradled his bruised ribs and told his mom, in halting fragments, what had happened. He left out the more graphic details, not wanting to traumatize her further, but there was enough in the story to make her knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. She was trembling, incensed that anyone would hurt her child. At the hospital, the nurses quickly ushered Devin into an exam room. A kind doctor with gentle hands pressed on his ribs, checked the bruises, and ordered an X-ray to ensure nothing was broken. His mother hovered nearby, answering administrative questions, battling tears, and shooting him supportive looks. But soon, a policeman arrived, standard procedure when a minor comes in with injuries consistent with assault. Devin exchanged a panicked glance with his mother. She gripped his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. "Tell him what happened." The officer was patient, scribbling notes. He was tall, with warm brown eyes and a sympathetic demeanor. "Devin, can you describe these men, or women, who did this?" Devin's voice shook. He described the flaming skull patch, the chain, the bikes, everything. The policeman's brow furrowed. "I know that group," he said quietly. "They've been causing trouble for a while now. No one wants to come forward as a witness. We suspect them in a string of assaults, property damage, even a missing person case, but nobody's been willing to testify. This could be a breakthrough." At that, Devin's heart lurched in his chest. Testify. The word felt enormous, like a boulder about to crush him. He pictured the rage in his eyes, the sneering, chain-wielding woman. The policeman seemed to sense Devin's fear. "I know it's scary, son, but people like them, they rely on fear to keep their victims quiet. If you talk, we can protect you. We can try to bring them in." Devin could only nod, swallowing the lump in his throat. His mind was still spinning. "I recorded them," he murmured after a moment, "but they destroyed my phone." The policeman's eyes lit up with interest. "Is there any chance the footage was backed up somewhere?" "I'm not sure," Devin admitted, voice trembling. "Sometimes my videos automatically back up to my cloud drive if I have a signal, but I don't know if it worked. There wasn't much reception out there." The officer offered a slim smile. "Well, that's our next step. We'll do everything we can to recover it. If that footage exists, that's invaluable evidence." He closed his notebook, tapping the edge of it. "I'll need you to come down to the station once you're discharged, file a report with more details. We'll see if we can get that footage. In the meantime," he paused, gaze drifting over Devin's battered form, "take care of yourself. We'll talk soon." When the officer left, Devin sank back against the hospital bed, head buzzing with a mixture of relief and dread. He was stepping onto a dangerous path, one where a notorious biker gang was at stake. 1,000 thoughts assaulted him, but one rose above all others. If he had that footage, if it was indeed in his cloud storage, he might hold the key to putting these people behind bars. But that also made him their biggest threat. The next few hours blurred. Nurses came and went, checking bandages, administering painkillers. Devon's mother hovered, her presence a comforting anchor. The X-ray showed no broken bones, only bruised ribs and minor contusions. Once they were cleared to leave, Devon felt a weight pressing down on him, the knowledge that now, outside the hospital's walls, he had to face the reality of going home, of living with the fear that at any moment, those bikers might decide he wasn't worth letting live. When they arrived home, Devon's mother helped him up to his bedroom. She fussed over him, bringing pillows, blankets, and a glass of water. He met her eyes and saw that she was barely holding it together. "Mom, I'm okay," he tried to reassure her, even though a wave of pain lanced through his ribs every time he shifted. She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "My baby, you're not okay. You could been killed." She sniffed, taking his hand. "I'm so sorry this happened. I'm so sorry I wasn't there to protect you." Devon swallowed the knot in his throat. "It's not your fault. I shouldn't have gone skateboarding on that empty road by myself." Guilt churned in him, but he knew ultimately the blame lay with the gang, not with him or his mother. She smoothed his hair from his forehead. "I'm calling your uncle. He might know someone who can help." His uncle Richard was a lawyer, though not a criminal attorney. Still, the thought of having some legal advice eased Devon's anxiety a bit. As soon as she left the room, Devon reached for his laptop on the desk beside his bed. He opened it, the screen glowing to life in the dimly lit bedroom. His heart fluttered with a tremor of hope and dread. Logging into his cloud storage, he navigated to the folder where his phone's auto-uploads usually landed. The page took a moment to load, the spinning icon feeling like an eternity. Finally, the screen populated with a list of recent files. He scrolled through the thumbnails, heart pounding. He saw a few short skateboard clips from earlier that day, each file name a jumble of letters and numbers. Then he saw a file with a timestamp that matched the approximate time of the attack. The file size seemed to indicate it was more than just a few seconds. Devon's breath hitched. He clicked on it. A short loading bar flickered. Then, in shaky handheld footage, he saw the moment he'd discreetly started recording. The horizon was tilted, partially obscured by the inside of his pocket, but the audio was clear. His heart pounded as the memory of the event washed over him. He could hear the bikers' voices, the rev of the engines, the chilling laughter. The footage wasn't perfect. Much of it was shot from inside his pocket or pointed at the ground, but the audio captured enough to prove there were multiple assailants, brandishing a chain, making direct threats. And for a few seconds, the phone's camera even caught the gang's emblem on one rider's jacket when Devon's pocket angle shifted. A wave of relief mingled with renewed terror. He had proof. He had everything he needed to bury them, or at least to give the cops a chance to track them down. But now, the stakes were even higher. If the gang suspected the video still existed, they wouldn't stop until they destroyed that evidence and possibly him along with it. Heart thudding, he called out for his mother. She came in, worry etched on her face. He beckoned her over, showing her the video. She clasped a hand to her mouth, tears forming again. "We have to show this to the police," she said, voice trembling. "They can't get away with this." Devon nodded, chewing his lip. He felt torn. His sense of justice screamed to expose them, but every mental image of cold stare made him shiver. "Okay, Mom, let's do it." That night they barely slept. Calls were made, first to Uncle Richard, then to the officer who'd taken Devon's statement. Arrangements were made to hand over the video. But every time a car engine revved in the distance, Devon jumped, heart in his throat, imagining a gang of motorcycles outside his window. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him, and he drifted into a restless sleep plagued by nightmares of roaring bikes and chains whistling through the air. In the morning, the police asked Devon and his mother to come in. They arrived at the station, a modest brick building with a few cruisers parked outside. Officer, the kind-eyed policeman from the hospital, greeted them. He brought them into a small interview room with a flickering fluorescent light and sterile walls. The only furniture was a rectangular table and 4 chairs. Devon's ribs ached as he sat. His mother squeezed his hand for support. They handed over a copy of the video. Officer and another detective, a stern-faced woman with short cropped hair, viewed it on a laptop. Devon watched their expressions shift from curiosity to grim determination. The audio was muddy, but distinct enough that they could hear the gang threatening Devon. The emblem was visible. The detective rewound the clip, pausing on a segment where the patch was briefly in the frame. "We'll need to enhance that, but it looks like the Flaming Skull Legion. We've had run-ins with them before." She looked up at Devon. "Thank you for this. It'll help us get them off the streets." Devon's mother spoke up, her voice wavering. "But is my son going to be safe if they realize he turned this in?" Officer gave a reassuring nod. We'll do everything we can to protect him. We can arrange some patrols around your neighborhood, or we could talk about protective custody if the threat becomes too great. Devin's stomach lurched. Protective custody. That implied his life might be in serious danger. He cast his eyes downward, tears burning the back of his throat. This was no longer just about him wanting justice. This was about survival. Yet the idea of going somewhere unknown, being hidden away from his home, from everything he knew, felt suffocating. But if it meant staying alive. Let's just start with the extra patrols, his mother said firmly, though Devin saw the fear behind her eyes. We're not letting them scare us out of our home. The detective nodded. We'll keep you posted on the case. As soon as we get an ID on the individuals, we can move forward with arrests. Her tone held a confidence that Devin wished he shared. They left the station with an odd sense of both relief and dread. The next few days passed in a tense haze. Devin tried to go about his normal routine. He told a watered-down version of events to his sister, who was horrified and outraged, and took a few days off from school to recover from his injuries. But each night he slept fitfully, half expecting to hear the thunder of motorcycles outside. Despite the painkillers, his injuries still ached, a constant reminder of that day. Meanwhile, the police pursued leads. The video had circulated internally, and an effort to locate members of the Flaming Skull Legion was. Devin found himself glued to news reports, half hoping to see a headline about arrests being made. But the days slipped by without major developments. It turned out the gang was slippery, with no permanent address, no official clubhouse. They traveled in packs, drifting from town to town. Whenever law enforcement got close, they vanished like smoke. One evening, about a week after the attack, Devin's mother and sister left for the grocery store, leaving him alone at the house. His father was away on a business trip, unaware of the severity of Devin's assault, only that something bad had happened. Devin was on the couch, trying to distract himself with an action movie, but every explosion on screen made him jump. A sense of paranoia had burrowed into his psyche, refusing to let go. That was when he heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles. He tensed, heart pounding. Slowly he got up and peered out the living room window. The street was quiet, the last purple streaks of sunset casting long shadows, but the rumble persisted, growing louder. Without thinking, Devin grabbed his phone. Actually, it was his mother's old phone that he'd been using as a replacement, and dialed the police station's number. He half-remembered officers' instructions that if he saw anything suspicious, he should call. He waited, breath hitching. The rumble seemed to come closer, and then silence. The only sound was Devin's pulse roaring in his ears. He pressed the phone to his temple, waiting for someone to pick up. Then the line clicked. "Police department, what's your emergency?" Before Devin could answer, a frantic pounding rattled the front door. Devin jolted, nearly dropping the phone. Fear seized him. He stepped back, heart hammering so loud it drowned out all rational thought. The knocking came again, harder this time. He was certain it must be them. The gang had found him. He forced himself to speak into the phone, voice quivering. I think the gang is outside my house. Flaming Skull Legion. They're the ones who attacked me. Please send someone. My address is... A sudden crash cut him off. Something heavy slammed against the door. Devin scrambled, grabbing the nearest piece of furniture, a small side table, to barricade the entrance. He realized how futile that was, but terror was driving him. The operator's voice crackled with urgency. "Stay on the line, sir. Officers are en route." Devin pressed himself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. He forced himself to glance out the window. Sure enough, through the thin curtains, he saw the outlines of two motorcycles parked on the curb. On one bike was a stocky figure, helmet still on. Another figure was already off the bike, striding toward the front porch. Devin recognized the shape of those arms, that posture. It might have been Ratface or possibly himself. Panic spread like wildfire. If they broke in, he had no way out. The back door was locked, but that might not stop them from circling around. The door shook again under a fresh barrage of pounding. Devin bit back a sob, mind spinning with regrets. He'd known this was a risk, but it all felt so terrifyingly real now. He thought of running to the kitchen for a knife, but that might just escalate the situation. He forced a ragged breath and yelled through the door, "The police are coming." "Leave me alone." A mocking laugh sounded from the other side, muffled by the thick wood. "We're just here to say hi," a man's voice drawled, followed by another crash, as though a shoulder was slamming into the door. The hinges groaned. Devin heard the operator on the phone. "Stay calm, sir. Officers are arriving shortly." But a siren in the distance was not going to save him if they got in right now. Another loud thud. A crack split the doorframe. Devon swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. This was it. He braced himself, adrenaline flooding his limbs. The door gave way with a splintering shriek, and two men burst inside, wearing leather vests emblazoned with the flaming skull patch. One had a shaved head, tattoos coiling up his neck. Devon recognized him from the day of the attack. The other was tall, face obscured by the gloom, but his stance radiated menace. Devon let out a strangled cry, backing away. The man with the shaved head, the same one who'd rummaged through his backpack, smirked. "Told you we'd find you," he sneered. He spotted the phone in Devon's hand. "Drop it," he hissed. Devon's shaking fingers let the phone slip to the floor. The operator's voice was still audible, tinny and distant. "Hello, sir, are you there?" The tall man crushed the phone under his boot, cutting off the connection. The room fell into a tense silence, save for Devon's ragged breathing. The shaved-head man advanced, raising a thick metal flashlight in his hand. "We know you ratted us out," he growled. "You and that little video." "How did you find me?" Devon asked, voice trembling, though it was a pointless question. The tall man laughed, a low rumble that made the hairs on Devon's arms stand up. "We've got friends, kid. Heard rumors you'd gone to the cops, that you had some evidence. We just came to make sure you know that was a bad idea." Terror strangled Devon, but behind it was anger. How dare they break into his home? How dare they try to silence him for seeking justice? He backed away, hands raised, unsure of what else to do. The shaved-head man lunged, grabbing Devon by the collar, yanking him forward so violently that Devon slammed into the wall, knocking pictures askew. Pain exploded in his bruised ribs. He choked back a scream. "You thought you could ruin us." The man's face was inches from Devon's, spit flying from his lips. "Your video doesn't mean a thing if you're not around to testify." Devon's vision blurred as the tall man stepped in, brandishing a switchblade. Its wicked edge glinted under the living room lamp. "We're gonna give you one last chance to say you're sorry for messing with us," he said in a quiet, deadly voice, pressing the blade lightly against Devon's arm. Devon's knees wobbled. "I'm sorry," he gasped, the words catching in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was lying or if fear had taken over, but survival demanded compliance. The shaved-head man leaned in closer. "Who else has the video, huh? Did you share it with your cop buddies?" Devon could hardly think straight. "Though the cops have it, it's too late. Why, you can't destroy all the copies." He wasn't sure if that was the bravest or thing he could say, but it spilled out, a frantic mixture of panic and defiance. The tall man cursed under his breath. "Then we'll just have to convince you to tell them it's a hoax, that you made it up, or we'll hurt your family. You got that?" Devon's terror soared off the charts. They were threatening his mother, his sister. But a sudden surge of defiance rushed in. He couldn't let them hold that over him forever. Anger burst through the fear, giving him a reckless burst of energy. He twisted free from the shaved-head man's grip, ignoring the pain that flared through his, and ducked under the blade. Before they could react, he scrambled toward the kitchen, shouting, "Help, somebody help me." Heavy boots thundered behind him. He heard sirens in the distance now, growing louder. Relief clashed with panic. They might arrive in time, or they might arrive too late. In the kitchen, Devon darted around the island, panting. The tall man lunged, but Devon swung open a cupboard door in desperation, striking the attacker's forearm. The blade clattered across the tile. The shaved-head man cursed, kicking a chair out of his way. "Give it up, kid," he bellowed. Devon's heart hammered. He heard the wail of sirens very close now, maybe just outside. The overhead lights flashed red and blue through the front windows, flickering against the walls. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. If the police were here. The shaved-head man seemed to realize their time was up. He made a move to grab the fallen knife, but the front door burst open. An officer's voice rang out. "Police, freeze." A scramble of movement ensued. The tall man dashed toward the back door, only to find another officer blocking his way. The shaved-head man dove for the living room, raising his hands in a half-surrender as he realized there were no escape routes. Sirens wailed outside, lights flashing. Devon shrank back against the kitchen island, tears streaming down his face, body shaking with relief and shock. In a blur of motion, the police subdued both men, forcing them to the floor, cuffs snapping into place. One officer read them their rights while the other checked Devon for injuries, guiding him gently to sit down. Devon's entire body felt limp, drained. When the adrenaline began to recede, his ribs throbbed angrily. He leaned against the island, wincing, but the relief that flooded him was overwhelming. They had come. The police had arrived in time. Officer appeared at Devon's side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "We got them." Devin nodded, too exhausted and shaken to speak. He watched as the two bikers were hauled outside, cursing and spitting threats that landed on deaf ears. Neighbors began to spill onto their porches, staring wide-eyed at the spectacle of flashing lights and shouting criminals. Officer led Devin to the living room couch, where paramedics soon arrived to check him over. Devin's mother rushed in moments later, grocery bags forgotten in the driveway, tears streaming down her face as she pulled him into a careful hug. "Are you okay? Oh my God, are you okay?" she sobbed. He nodded, trying to hold himself together for her sake. In that moment, the last of his bravado crumbled, and he clung to her, letting the tears fall freely. The next hours were a whirlwind of statements, forms, and chaos. Through it all, Devin felt an odd mixture of triumph and lingering terror. They had caught two of the bikers, but the entire gang was still out there, including the ringleader. This was the beginning of a bigger battle. In the following weeks, the police used the information Devin provided, as well as the recovered phone footage, to launch a coordinated operation against the Flaming Skull Legion. Some members scattered, others were arrested in a series of raids. The local news picked up the story, broadcasting a segment titled, "Teen's Secret Video Leads to Biker Gang Takedown." Devin's identity was kept confidential to protect him, but in the neighborhood, rumors swirled. Word traveled. Some lauded him as a brave hero, others whispered that he'd put himself and his family in danger. Devin's nights were still restless, plagued by nightmares and the persistent fear that the gang's leader might retaliate. But little by little, he found himself reclaiming pieces of normalcy. He returned to school, carefully avoiding the back roads. Students in the hall whispered about how battered he looked a few weeks ago, but he shrugged off their curiosity, keeping the details private. Therapy helped. His mother insisted he speak with a counselor about the trauma. At first he resisted, not wanting to revisit the horror, but gradually he opened up, and each session felt like shedding a layer of guilt, fear, and shame. He realized none of it was his fault. He hadn't caused the violence, he'd merely been a victim, and in trying to expose them, he shown courage. It took time, but eventually the police tracked down the leader. He was arrested outside a bar in a neighboring state, the same flaming skull patch on his jacket. The news of his arrest sent a wave of relief through Devin. The man who haunted his nightmares was finally behind bars. With the arrests piling up, the Flaming Skull Legion's hold on the region loosened, and many of its members vanished or went to prison. Months later, Devin found himself in court, testifying behind closed doors for the trial of several high-ranking gang members. His mother sat beside him, her hand in his. The prosecutor guided him through recounting the events of that day and the subsequent break-in at his house. The defense tried to poke holes in his story, insinuating that maybe he'd escalated things or that the video didn't show the full picture. But the video, combined with the police testimony, was damning. One by one, the gang members were sentenced, with receiving the harshest punishment. When Devin stepped out of the courthouse, the sun shone bright in a cloudless sky. The crisp air felt cleaner, lighter. He looked at his mother and saw a mixture of pride and relief in her eyes. "You did it," she murmured. "You stood up to them. Now they can't hurt anyone else." Devin pressed his lips together, tears threatening to spill again, but this time they were tears of release. "I just hope it's over," he said softly. She put an arm around his shoulders, guiding him down the courthouse steps. "It's over," she promised, though they both knew healing was a process, not an event. The scars on Devin's skin began to fade with time, leaving only faint lines. But the mental scars, the memory of that helplessness as the chain bit into his flesh, as the phone was stomped beneath heavy boots, would take longer to heal. Yet he felt stronger, more aware of his own resilience. He'd faced down terror, and though it still woke him in the dead of night, he'd found a way to fight back, to stand up and say, "No more." Weeks turned into months. Life began to feel normal again, as normal as it could be. Devin returned to skateboarding, though he never again went off on lonely stretches of road by himself. He found a local skate park, bustling with kids his age, graffiti scrawled across concrete ramps. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, he dropped into the bowl, adrenaline coursing through him. The board rumbled beneath his feet, the wind ruffled his hair. For a moment, the weight of everything lifted, leaving only the exhilarating rush of the ride. He realized something then. He had changed, but not in the way the gang had intended. They wanted him broken, silent, cowering. Instead, he was cautious but determined, stronger in spirit. The memory of the attack would always be there, but so would the knowledge that he helped bring criminals to justice. So would the pride in knowing he'd persevered, protected his family, and come out the other side. Late that evening, after a long day at the skate park, Devon sat on his bed with a fresh phone in his hands. He'd purchased it with some savings and help from his mother. He opened the camera app, aiming it at his reflection in the bedroom mirror. A small laugh escaped him, tinged with memories of that day. He pressed record. This time the lens framed his own face. He spoke quietly into the mic. "Hey, this is Devon. If you're watching this, it means I decided to share my story. Some months ago, I was attacked by a biker gang on a deserted road. They tried to scare me to keep me silent, but I recorded them. I got them arrested, and now I'm still here. They didn't break me. If you ever feel scared or alone, if bad people try to silence you, remember that you have a voice. Sometimes all it takes is one video, one act of courage to change everything." He paused, eyes drifting to the faint scars on his arm. "And to the ones out there who think fear can keep us quiet, you have no idea how strong people can be when they stand together." Then he ended the recording. A wave of emotions washed over him: pain, relief, pride, sorrow for what he'd endured, but also a sense of closure. He wasn't enough to think the world was safe and perfect. There would always be those who fed on fear, who harmed the vulnerable, but he knew now that even a single act of defiance could topple a chain of terror. He set the phone aside, lay back on his pillow, and let his eyes drift shut. Outside, the night was calm. The low hum of distant cars sounded like a lullaby instead of a threat. In the corner of his room, leaning against the wall, was his skateboard, battered but intact, a symbol of the day everything changed. He exhaled softly, letting tension seep from his limbs. Tomorrow was another day, and he would step into it, bruises healed, spirit unbroken, and camera at the ready, just in case the world needed reminding that the smallest voice, recorded at the right moment, could shake even the fiercest gang of devils.